Chapter 8. It was cold waiting in the water of the moat, so when Rupert disappeared into the mansion, I slowly climbed out and waited by the drawbridge gate next to the castle. Now only Detchard, Bersonin and de Gutet were left to protect the king in this prison. If only I had the keys to the king's room, but I knew I had to be patient. It was a quiet night and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when there was a loud noise from the mansion. I looked up at one of the windows and saw a shadow walk across the light. A woman's voice cried, "Help! Michael, help me!" It was Antoinette de Morban. This was exactly what I had asked her to say in my message to her, but it was around an hour too early, before my friends had reached the front door to the mansion, and before Johann had time to open it. I pulled out my sword and stood ready for what might happen. Then I heard her calling again. "Help, Michael! It's Rupert Hensey!" called Antoinette. Michael must have heard Antoinette de Morban call out, because I then heard him running to help her with his servants. There was now a loud argument. "This woman's been writing secret letters to Rassendyll." I heard Rupert call out. "She needs to be punished." "She's my guest," I heard Michael say. "It's you who needs to be punished." There was a shout and a noisy sword fight began in the room. It was hard to see what was happening, but briefly I saw Rupert and Johann through the window. "That's for you, Johann," Rupert called, striking his sword at him. "I know you're Rassendyll's spy." What had happened to Johann? What if he had been hurt? How could he open the door for our men? From the noises in the room, it seemed that Rupert was now fighting many men. Surely he would be caught. However, at the next moment, there was a loud cry and Rupert jumped out of the window and down into the moat below, where he swam away. Somehow, he had escaped. A minute later, de Gutet appeared in front of me, so I struck him with my sword and he fell to the ground. Quickly I looked through his clothes for the keys. There were 3. At last I could enter the room where the king was being kept prisoner. Opening the first door, I found myself at the top of some steps which led into a cold, dark room. The only light came from a small candle in one corner. As I walked down the steps, I could just hear voices coming from the room where the king was kept, behind a second door. Carefully walking towards the door, I stepped back quickly when it was suddenly opened. Now I could hear Detchard speaking. "We mustn't kill him yet or there'll be trouble." When a person appeared, I struck him with my sword. It was Bersonin, who fell heavily to the ground. Understanding there was danger, Detchard closed the door fast. Now surely he was alone in the room with the king and, remembering their plan, I knew the king was in real danger. Taking one of the keys, I quickly unlocked the door to the second room and opened it nervously. I think I expected to see the king had already been killed, but once inside the room I was relieved to see that Detchard was being held by the king's doctor. The king, weak from illness and chained in one corner, looked on in fear. The doctor was too weak to hold Detchard for long, and before I could help him, Detchard broke free and killed the poor doctor with his sword. Detchard turned to me and said, "At last." I held up my sword and it was lucky that Detchard did not have a gun. We began to fight. He was a much better swordsman than me and knew all the tricks. He smiled when he cut me on the arm, and I would soon have died if the king had not helped me. "My cousin Rudolph!" he cried, as if he only now realized who I was. He reached forward and pushed the legs of a chair into Detchard's body. "Push hard," I called. "Push against his legs." With the legs of the chair against him, Detchard found it hard to stand up. This made him angry, and he struck the king hard with his sword, but as he did so, he fell over the doctor's body. It was easy for me to kill him as he lay on the floor. Was the king dead too? I ran to where he lay. How happy I was when the king moaned, so I knew he was alive. But before I could help him, I heard Rupert somewhere outside the king's prison calling out, "Come on, Michael. Let's fight." I tore a piece from my shirt to make a bandage for the cut on my arm, and quietly opening the prison door, I looked out. The drawbridge was now down once more. Rupert stood in the middle of the bridge with his sword, while the door to the mansion at the other end of the drawbridge was guarded by some very frightened-looking servants, as well as Johann, who I was pleased to see was unhurt. Then Antoinette de Maubin angrily called out from behind the servants, "The Duke's dead, you've already killed him." "Dead?" called Rupert. "That's good. Then I'm your leader now. Put down your weapons and do as I say." Instead of putting down their weapons, however, the servants allowed Antoinette de Maubin to walk onto the bridge, and she was pointing a gun at Rupert. But before she had time to shoot, if, indeed, she planned to, Rupert once again jumped quickly into the water below the bridge. More loud voices were heard, and I realized the Sapt and his men must have finally arrived at the front door, on the other side of the mansion. Feeling confident that the king would be safe, I ran after Rupert and also jumped into the water. He swam faster than I could with my wounded arm, and he quickly swam to where the rope was tied to the tree above the moat. He looked surprised but pleased to see the rope and quickly climbed up. I was, perhaps, a minute behind him, and once at the top of the rope, I could see him running off into the forest. At one stage I saw him look back at me. I thought I saw him waving, as if it were a game, as if he knew I would never catch him. We both ran, further and further into the forest of Zenda, until I heard another cry. What had Rupert done now? Soon I discovered that he had found a boy riding to market, and had quickly pulled him from the horse and taken his place. Rupert was trying to get the boy to be quiet by giving him some money, and this gave me time to catch up with him. "Stop!" I shouted. He looked at me and smiled. "What did you do at the castle?" he asked. "I made sure that you are the last of the 6 men," I told him. "Do you mean that you got inside the king's prison?" he asked with surprise. "I did." "And what's happened to the king?" "He was hurt, but he's alive," I told him. "Why didn't you follow my plan?" he said. "We could have worked well together." "Get off your horse and fight like a man," I said. I ran at Rupert with my sword, but still on his horse, he easily pushed me away with his own sword. I ran at him again and managed to cut his cheek, but now he rode at me with his sword held high. I would surely have been killed, but at that moment there was a shout as Fritz arrived on another horse carrying a gun. Rupert stopped and looked at us. He understood that he could not fight us both, so he turned the horse and rode away as fast as he could. "Go after him," I said to Fritz. But Fritz was looking at me, not at Rupert. "Sir, you don't look well," he said, and I suddenly felt very weak. Fritz got off his horse and ran up to me as I fell to the ground. "Is the king safe?" I asked him weakly. "Thanks to you, he is," said Fritz. "But you're injured. Here, let me help you." Next to us, the young boy looked on with wide eyes. "Isn't that the king?" he said, pointing at me. Fritz ignored him. After a long rest, I felt strong enough to walk back, leaning heavily on Fritz's arm. I later learned from Fritz and Antoinette de Mauban what happened that night at the castle and the events leading up to it. A few months earlier, the Duke had met Antoinette de Mauban in Paris and had asked her to Ruritania to see the coronation. She respected the Duke and was pleased to be his guest. However, some of the Duke's servants told her servants about the Duke's ambitions to be king. She did not like his evil plans and decided to warn me of everything he wanted to do. When the Duke found out that she had warned me in Strelsau, he tricked Antoinette de Mauban by inviting her and her servants to his castle. Once she was there, he made sure they could not leave in order to stop her telling anyone about his plan. Luckily, with Johann as our spy, Antoinette was still able to send us letters and we could use her position in the castle to help us. Somehow, however, Rupert discovered that she was helping us, so he wanted to punish her. By chance he chose the very night that we were attacking the castle. When Michael came to see what was happening, Rupert killed him in the fight that followed. Rupert, it seemed, believed that without the Duke, I really would stay as the king and somehow reward him for his evil work. He did not understand that I was pretending to be the king for the good of Ruritania. He believed I wanted to be king forever. Because Johann was helping the Duke, he could not open the front door for Sapt and his men at 2 o'clock, and it took a long time before they could finally enter the mansion. This they did just as Rupert was escaping from Antoinette de Mauban. Soon Sapt found the king lying in his prison, hurt but still alive. He was carried with his face covered to the mansion, where Antoinette helped to look after the poor king until another doctor could arrive. Meanwhile, Fritz came to look for me, knowing that I must have run off into the forest after Rupert. Back at the castle, Colonel Sapt had to ask Johann and Antoinette de Mauban to guard the secret about the real king. His men and the servants thought that the king had been injured while rescuing the prisoner, who had gone after Rupert Hansai. News was sent to Tarlenheim to tell the princess that the king was hurt but alive, and that she should wait at Tarlenheim for him. The people of Strelsau also heard that the brave king had fought with his brother because he had kept a prisoner in Zenda who was a friend of the king. The Duke had tried to kill the king, who was injured, but the evil Duke had died. However, Princess Flavia did not want to wait at Tarlenheim and asked Marshal Strachinch to take her to Zenda at once so she could see the king. Her coach was approaching the castle as Fritz led me back from the forest. When we saw the coach, I quickly hid behind a tree, but we did not realize that the boy whose horse Rupert had taken had followed us. He was very excited and called out, "Princess! The king's here, behind this tree." We tried to keep the boy quiet, but it was too late. The princess's coach had stopped and I could see the marshal leaning out of the coach window to talk to the boy. "What you say is nonsense," called Strachinch. "The king's injured in the castle." "No, really, he's here. He fought a man who took my horse." At this moment, Sapt rode out of the castle to meet the party. "This boy says the king's over there behind that tree," said Strakenstein sapped with a strange look. "No, he's in the castle behind me," said Sapt with a smile. "Please, come and see if you don't believe me," said the boy. The smile disappeared from Sap's face and he looked worried, before quickly saying, "I'll go." "Let me come, too," said the princess. Sapt thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Then come alone." The princess was helped down from the coach. She then walked with Sapt across the grass towards me. I sat down behind the tree, putting my hands over my face. Fritz put his hand on my shoulder. When Princess Flavia saw me, she ran up and cried, "It is you! Are you hurt?" I said nothing, so she looked at Sapt and said, "What's this game you're playing?" "This is not the king," said Sapt quietly. "What do you mean it's not the king?" said the princess. "This is not the king," said Sapt again. "He's the king!" cried Flavia. "It's his face. Rudolph, look at me. What's happening?" Looking into her eyes, I said, "Forgive me, madam. I'm not the king." The princess looked surprised, then frightened, and I could see she did not know what to say. "Come," Sap said gently to the princess. "It's time you came into the castle. We have much to discuss." I watched as she walked away. Now my game was nearly at an end. All that day Fritz and I waited in the forest while the princess stayed in the castle with the king. That night, when it was dark, Fritz led me to the castle where I stayed, unseen, in the rooms that had been the king's prison. Johann brought me food and told me what he knew. The king was getting better and had seen the princess with Sapt, and Marshal Strakenstein had returned to Strelsau. Johann also said that everyone was talking about the strange prisoner of Zenda and who he could be. Some said he was an English friend of the king's who had heard about the duke's plans, so the duke had locked him up to stop him from speaking to the king. Later that evening, Fritz came to me and said the king wanted to see me. So I went to his room, where he was lying in bed with a doctor next to him. He looked weak and tired, but smiled when he saw me. "Cousin. My friend. You're injured, too. We're always the same, you and I." I smiled and bowed down before him. "I want to thank you," he said. "I hoped that tomorrow you'd come with me to Strelsau and tell everyone about the brave things that you've done, but Sap tells me that this isn't possible." "He's right, sir. My work in your country is complete." "Very well, I'll return to Strelsau alone. People know that the king was injured, so they won't be surprised to see me looking a little different. But you've taught me something, Cousin Rudolph. You've shown me what a true king should be," he said. "I'd happily help you again, sir," I said. And I meant it, thinking that perhaps I would need to. Nobody knew where Rupert had disappeared to, and the thought of the man who had almost beaten me still makes my heart beat louder in my chest. "The princess has asked to see you, too," said the king. "She can come in now." "Does she know everything?" I whispered, before she arrived. "She does," the king answered. The princess came into the room and I bowed down to her. "It seems you've tricked me," she said, but not unkindly. "I would like to apologize to you for this," I said. "You don't need to apologize. I should thank you for all you've done for Ruritania," she said. "I've learned all about duties and responsibilities," I said to her. "It's a lesson I'll never forget." and we'll never forget how you've helped the king," she replied. The king smiled, then closed his eyes and fell asleep, and the doctor said it was best if I left him. I bowed and left the people who would shape the future of Ruritania, not knowing that I would never see the king, the princess or Rupert ever again. A few hours later, Sapt and Fritz bowed down to me as I got on a train at a small station near the border with Ruritania. The other passengers on the train must have thought an important person in a large coat and hat was about to leave their country, but it was only I, Rudolf Rassendyll, an English gentleman. When I finally returned to England, I had some explaining to do. My brother Robert and his wife Rose told me that everyone had been looking for me. And Rose was very disappointed when I told her I had not written a book. "At least the ambassador has a job for you soon," she said. "He now knows which country he'll be sent to." "Where's that?" I asked. "Ruritania. Sir Jacob Borrowdale is to be the British ambassador in Strelsau." "I don't think it'd be a good idea for me to work there," I said. "But you promised you'd take the job," cried Rose. "You're right, but please look at this," I said, showing them a photograph in a newspaper which showed the king's coronation. There was I, with Sapt, Fritz, Michael and the princess. Robert and Rose looked at it in amazement. "Yes, you look very like the king of Ruritania," said Rose. "But this is just an excuse. You could have become an ambassador yourself one day. If you don't go, you'll never be anyone important." I knew, however, that I did not need to go. I had been something far more important than an ambassador. I had been a king. I remembered and understood those words Rose had said to me all those months ago. A person with a position in society has responsibilities. But even without a position in society, we all have a duty to help other people when we can, and we all become better people for doing so.